I sometimes have a way of UFOs is just not one thing. UFOs are unidentified, and they are really a multitude of phenomena. Really, we're not really just dealing with one thing. We're dealing with a lot of things, and that's what's confusing about this. Because somebody can have an experience, see, and if it's not your experience, then how do you justify that? See, this is the one subject where you really got to give a little bit of leeway to the next guy, because you don't know exactly how to describe what you're really undergoing. See, it's all kind of very confusing. And after, don't do the plan at me.
You're my friend.
Well, you might not be after an hour. I don't know, you know. But anyway, the reason too, I made this comment about Alex Collier, who I really don't know. I don't think I spent really more than 5 minutes speaking with him, but he did lecture at these two programs. Is that once you're caught up in this UFO thing, and some people do it to the extreme, or maybe something causes them to do it to the extreme, sometimes the things that happen around these people are very irrational, and they don't make a lot of sense. And for 50 years, believe it or not, I've been trying to make sense out of this. And maybe I have made some sense to myself. I don't know as if I make sense to other people, but we'll find that out in just a little while.
Well, I want to welcome Tim back to Tucson, and for putting up with this dry heat, blow dryer in your face heat, and my voice is a little raspy from all the dry heat. But and he got off the plane, and we were anxiously wanting to see King Tut, and just let everybody know who we're wanting to see King Tut. He doesn't come out on Mondays and Tuesdays, so try him on other days. And when you get to be a friend of Tim's, you get weird things in the mail, like this thing, whatever it is, came today. And I thought it was some weird thing my son ordered, electronic thing, and didn't tell me, and I was getting all mad at my son. But then I said, oh no, that's something to do with Tim. But anyway, it glows in the dark, and it's something that was sent to Tim to take to Jerome, because he's going to be doing some radio shows this weekend, Saturday, on the hauntings in Jerome. So his friend, he has a lot of connections all over the world, I take it.
Universe.
But somebody got wind that he was going to be in a ghostly environment, and sent him this little thing that is some kind of Ghostbuster, and he sent it without instructions. So what do you think? Does any psychic know what to do with this? It only sells for $99.95 if anybody wants to buy one. We don't know, even what it sells for. But I thought... Yeah, my friend Joshua Warren, you've probably heard him on Coast to Coast, Joshua P. Warren. He is the host of his own radio show on Saturday night out of Asheville, North Carolina, Speaking is Strange. And actually, I think he is the best voice of parapsychology. He's not boring, that's for sure. But if you hear on some of the other shows, he's just like a normal guest. But when he does his 3 hours on Saturday night, and you can listen to it on the internet, he's a little bit of showman and a little bit of Ghostbuster. So there you go. Anyway, I'm here to divulge the secret of the universe. And since an early age, Tim Beckley's life has more or less revolved around the paranormal. His grandfather saw an apparition of a headless horseman. His life was saved by invisible beings around the age of 3. The house he was raised in was haunted. Tim also underwent out-of-body experiences at the age of 6 and saw his first 3 UFOs when he was but 10, and has had 2 more sightings since, including an attempt to communicate with one of these objects. Tim grew up listening to all of the night talk shows in the country that revolved around the strange and the unexplained. Long John Nebel's guests included the early UFO contactees who claimed to have visited other planets and built time machines in the desert. Tim was fascinated by everything that went bump in the night, or even in the daylight for that matter. Years later, Tim was to appear on Long John's show numerous times, and over the years has been a frequent guest on hundreds of programs which have come and gone just like Ghost in the Night. Tim has started his career as a writer early on. At age 14, he purchased a mimeograph machine and started putting out Interplanetary News Service report. Over the years...
Presumptuous for a 14-year-old, perhaps, yes.
Over the years, he has written over 25 books on everything from rock music to the secret MJ-12 papers. He has been a stringer for the national tabloids, such as The Inquirer, an editor of over 30 different magazines, most of which never lasted more than a couple of issues. His longest running effort was...
It moved by itself.
It's haunted. Was the newsstand publication of UFO Universe. I used to buy those.
Yeah, hey, they give it a discount.
That's what did it to me. In New Orleans, it was like Circle K's. It was like little, but they weren't called Circle K in New Orleans. Time savers, they were called. Yeah, they're somewhere in time now. Anyway, he had this publication, UFO Universe. I have some at home, as a matter of fact, which went for 11 years. Today, he is the president of Inner Light Global Communications and editor of the Conspiracy Journal and Bazaar. What's that one? Bazaar.
Straight, paranormal things like we sell
Might say that
equipment. So.
everyone can take the Conspiracy Journal.
Right.
She brought us for you guys. He is one of the few Americans ever to have been invited to speak before closed-door meetings on UFOs, presided over by the late Earl of
Clancarty
at the House of Lords in England. He visited Loch Ness in Scotland while in the UK and went home with the belief that Nessie was somehow connected with dragons of mythology, as well as strange discs engraved on cathedrals and ghostly phenomena. Inner Light Publications and Global Communications catalogs of books and videos, titles now number over 200, including the works of Tim Swartz, T. Lobsang Rampa?
Third Eye was his big song.
Commander X, Brad Steiger, and John Keel.
That's it. That's just a repeat. Oh, well, that's a question.
In addition to making an in-depth study of the UFO mystery over the 40 years because of your own paranormal experiences, you have also delved into the history of spiritualism and noted that UFOs...
Oh, here. This is the first page.
Sorry.
Sure.
They weren't
It's my
in
fault.
order.
I didn't number.
I hope they're all in order.
That's good.
Okay, you've written and co-authored over or edited over 70 books over a period of 40 plus years.
I was embarrassed to say 50. But I did get started in this
Sure.
rather young, yeah.
What year did you get started then?
Well, I had my first UFO sighting in 1957 when I saw these two disc-shaped objects above the street where we were living. So I went and I started taking out books out of the library, like by the Major Kehoe and Edward Ruppelt, whatever was available on the subject. Frank Edwards, for a quarter or 50 cents, you could buy his books through the Weekly Reader or Scholastic Books or something like that. Stranger Than Fiction, I think, was one, you know. And books on Houdini. I remember even buying a book on Houdini, a great escape artist, and I published some works about him. But I was always, my whole background, see, my family, well, my father's side of the family, they were kind of very strict Baptists, so he didn't like to talk about any of this too much. My mother, on the other hand, you know, had experiences of her own. It seemed to run to some degree in the family. In fact, just to get into this here, my grandfather on my father's side of the family saw a vision or a phantom behind the barn. They lived in Kentucky, in fact, the same town that Colonel Sanders is from, Shelbyville. Anyway, this is back many, a century ago. Had a vision, or saw the actual thing, depending on how you look at it, of a headless horseman behind the barn. Now, headless horseman ghosts seem to be rather popular. I mean, they come up all the time. In fact, in Jerome, we have the supposed apparition of headless Charlie, who was a miner who was caught in some kind of mine explosion or something there, and his ghost is said to wander around Jerome. I'm sure we'll be able to find him with a little detector. But anyway, we assume that the headless horseman that my grandfather saw was from either the Confederate Army or the Union Army. We don't really know which, because kind of Kentucky was kind of neutral at that time. I think the neighborhood where he lived in that area, they might have sympathized with the South a little bit more, so that would mean perhaps the horseman was a Union soldier, but there's no way of telling. I mean, you got no head, you can't talk.
Okay. Tell me, what is the, headless horseman, is
He hadn't read George
does he
Washington.
come into the realm of unidentified, and what does unidentified mean to you
Well,
as far as being Mr. UFO?
Well, Mr. UFO, actually how I got the name. I was involved with promoting like rock bands for quite a few years, and there was a band, you probably heard of them, called Kiss. Well, the guitar player, Ace Frehley, was always a little bit tipsy. I guess he had a reputation for that, even if you read some of the magazines and stuff. In fact, they kicked him out of the band. Well, he could never remember my name, but he could remember that I was interested in UFOs. So he's always called Mr. UFO. So that's kind of how I just figured, well, that seems to be a good moniker to adapt. But I've been interested in all UFOs. You can't just look at UFOs and say, oh, they're all spaceships. To me, anyway, it's all in the realm of the paranormal, the spiritual, whatever you want to call it. So we had
Does that go against popular belief that
probably so. Yes, I would say
at least bullets theories.
Yeah. Well, at least for many years, there was the assumption, and I think it's one that was secretly fostered by the government, that you shouldn't believe in UFOs at all. But if you're going to believe in UFOs, you should accept the fact that they are from outer space or from some other civilization. And the reason for that is I believe that a lot of the early sightings, including the crash at Roswell, New Mexico, was not an alien spacecraft. At that time, the U.S. government had brought over here from Germany, shortly after the war, some of the biggest Nazi sympathizers, including Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth. And I believe that some of these sightings, including the crash at Roswell, was probably something that the Germans had been working on during World War II. And instead of admitting that the government was involved in working with these ex-Nazis, they would rather have you believe that it was something from outer space. So if you're going to believe anything at all...
Would that go along with Adamski and the Mars contacts, like these blonde, speak German accented...
Well, that is true. That is true.
ET, supposedly from Venus.
Well, it is true that some of the early contacts, and perhaps even now, Betty and Barney Hill. If you listen to Barney's tape recording of his while he's under hypnosis, he says he felt like they were Nazis looking down through the craft window. Reinhold Schmidt, who was a grain buyer out of Kearney, Nebraska, you probably remember the story, was driving along one night and this craft, kind of disc-shaped object, landed, and he was invited inside the ship, and there was some rather human, typically human in appearance beings sitting there, and he did say that they talked with a German accent. So it's possible that some of these early cases did revolve around some of these experiments that the Germans had been brought over here, which was later to become part of the experimentation of Area 51 as well. Now, I don't say that all UFOs are any one thing. In fact, I think that's what has caused a great deal of confusion.
There's a paranormal component as well as a deception component.
Well, I would say that I would say that 95% of the UFO phenomena is paranormal in nature. In fact, if you start talking to the witnesses here, you'll often find that after their first UFO sighting, there are other things that start happening to them. Ghosts invade their house, or poltergeist phenomena, lights going on and off, doors opening and closing. I remember one time, quite a few years ago, I visited the town of Athens, Ohio. There was a little note in the little item in the New York newspaper about how something had landed in this cornfield behind the farmer's house. Well, I wouldn't call it a cornfield. I went and visited the place. The cornfield was maybe the size of this room. I wouldn't call it, but it was, he grew like a lot of people in urban, suburban areas. Grew their own. My grandparents did it. They just had a little, plot behind the house, and they grew everything under the sun. So this guy had corn that he was growing. Anyway, apparently his son or his grandson had been out rather late, coming in from a stickball game in the street or something like that, and had seen this glowing object over the cornfield. And the next day, he called his grandfather out, but the next day they went out and they looked, and this thing had apparently landed there because they could see the indentations in the ground, and the corn was all flattened. This is kind of, before crop circles, there were saucer nests, and that, I guess I always thought that that was part of that phenomena. But Ted Phillips, who was one of Dr. Hynek's associates, he has investigated over, I think at this point, 500 or 600 physical trace cases. And like myself, Ted Phillips and Philip Brognio and Dr. Hynek, for a fact, they all started out to be what we call nuts and bolts people, believing that these were majestic craft from other planets. They were traveling all this great distance to come here and see us every day.
What evidence do you have that we're not simply dealing with some sort of sophisticated?
Well, first of all, there's no indication that these things are quite that more advanced than we are. Even the crash in Roswell, what did they see? They saw something that looked like a little bit of balsa wood. They had a piece of aluminum foil, which when they bent, it would flatten out again. I mean, this is not a technology, to my way of thinking, that's 10,000 years more advanced than we are. In fact, everything that probably occurred in Roswell, including this aluminum foil now, and the transistors and all these things, they're certainly not 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, but aluminum foil doesn't go back to its original shape.
They have stuff now that it does. Indeed, it does. Okay. Yes, it does. Yes, indeed.
I haven't seen it.
Well, you're not. Are you working with the metallurgy or anything like that? No, it's been written about. You can go on the internet and
there's a lot of things that they don't show the general public.
But the general public isn't interested, as a rule. I mean, the general public just isn't interested in that. There's a lot of scientific discoveries, most of which get patented. Some of which are applied to different uses, either commercial or military, and others that never make it to the marketplace. Doesn't mean that they haven't been invented. So anyway, I've never been convinced. I don't see anything that tells me that this crash at Roswell or any of the other supposed crashes involve a technology that's many years ahead of us. Also, though, the interesting thing though about if this theory is true, that the Germans were behind some of these early UFO developments, where did they get their ideas for dish-shaped craft? Well, I've written about that, in fact, in Round Trip to Hell on the Flying Saucer, UFO Parasites, Aliens, Soul Suckers, and Invaders.
That's a scary title.
Yeah, good.
It's a scary cover.
Yeah, it is.
Gee
Well,
whiz.
how could you have a book?
How is this book selling?
Actually, it's doing fairly good. It's doing fairly good, actually.
Some people like the health scare out of it.
To me, I'd rather read the truth than read something just because it's sugar coated with sweetness and light. All this stuff goes on. I mean, you can't. This is pretty well documented. We've got research here from probably 50 different researchers.
If it's not sweetness and light, what do you think is behind this phenomenon?
Okay. Well, my way of thinking is that there is some intelligence that exists in the universe that we have very little or no control over. This intelligence exists separately from our own and operates in a totally different manner than anything that we could possibly conceive of. Now, some people might consider this in a religious or a spiritual sense, like God or something like that. But how does one go about defining God? To me, there are invisible realms, maybe perhaps more than one, that exist side by side with us, and they are here. Perhaps without even any, perhaps they don't even know what they're capable of doing. You know, it's kind of like you take the mentality of, let's say, an insect or a lion or some other sort of animal. When you look at their behavior, they do not behave like we humans would. So when you look at these beings that are coming here, and I say beings in the sense, I think that a lot of them are able to shapeshift. In fact, even the American Native Indians talk about how animals turn into humans, and some of the humans are able to shapeshift into wolves and into coyotes and so forth. I think you have all of this entangled with UFOs, and so we identify it with UFOs because it's easier to put a blanket term on it. Also, one of the things that's intrigued me, and I think it ties in with this, is coincidence and synchronicity.
I was going to ask you that because I was thinking about what Rick said with Wendell, how he was right in that moment in time that he was able to save Wendell's life, keep him from getting hit by a car. And that's a major synchronicity. And so you think there's something to a lot of these
okay,
synchronicities.
okay, well now here, this is something that has happened to me over and over again. And I can't tell you what the meaning of the synchronicities is. All I know is it seems to have plagued me as well as other people involved in UFO research. And here's just a few of them. Okay, when I was in the 4th grade, I had to do a book review. Well, most people probably do A Tale of Two Cities, or well, what's another book you would probably read? Today is probably
Great Expectations.
I didn't read that one, okay, but whatever. All right, so I chose the book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, by Gray Barker. Now, this was the first book where any researcher had talked about the Men in Black. It involved Gray Barker's investigation of Albert K. Bender. Albert K. Bender was this young man in his early 20s who had put out a newsletter and had a UFO organization. It was called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. He operated out of his home in Connecticut. And I guess the organization kind of grew by leaps and bounds. There wasn't there weren't any other places really to get information. He was putting out a fairly decent monthly newsletter. Anyway, he claims that one day there was a knock at the door, and 3 men dressed in black with the black hats and so forth appeared and told him that he had published something in his newsletter and had gotten too close to the truth about flying saucers, and they warned him, for the sake of his family and the sake of his country, that he should forego his investigation and close down his organization, which he did. Okay.
Sake of his country.
Yes,
That's
yeah, well, whatever,
secret.
yeah. And why, okay. But these, again, we think, a lot of people think, well, the Men in Black of government agents. Well, not according to what Albert K. Bender described, because he said these beings materialized on several occasions inside his home. They had vanished in front of his eye. I mean, there was all kinds of things that had happened to him that made him believe that they.
Well, in the 40 years that you've studied
okay,
this.
well, yeah, but let me finish the
Yeah.
story because it gets a little bit more intriguing. Okay, so this is probably the only report I ever got I gave in school that I got a B+ on.
Oh, great. Should have got an A+.
Well, you're right.
But since it was UFOs.
Yeah, oh yeah, you're right. In fact, I did a report one time on astronomy, which I was interested in, and I got like a D- because the teacher thought I had copied it from the Encyclopedia Britannica or something. Well, of course, the distances between the Earth and Saturn, I mean, you got to copy that from somewhere. But I was interested in the subject. But no, you can't be an intelligent student at the age of 14 or something. Well, little did I know. Here I did this book review that I got a good grade in. Gray Barker, the writer of that book, was to become a good friend of mine. In fact, he published my first 3 books on the subject, and when he passed away, I bought the last 50 copies of They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers from his estate. So, I mean, that's a coincidence, but okay, that's within the realm of possibility. How about this one? I was in San Francisco giving a lecture to a group a little bit larger than this. I think there were 400 people there. But in those days, you could attract a crowd because it was still a novelty, and a little bit, you know, if you were on a couple of radio shows, you could pack the place. And anyway, we'd given a talk. It was a National UFO conference, or what was it called in those days? You were on the board of directors.
Scientific ufologist, Congress of
Scientific Ufology. Yeah, it was Dale Reddick.
Right.
That he was a member, and he gave this, and I remember the place was pretty full. They even had a balcony and all. Okay, so I guess I arrived on Friday, gave my talk, and stayed the weekend. On Sunday, I had a flight to get back to the East Coast, but we had some time to kill, so we decided, well, let's go out to brunch. Okay, so we're seated around the table. It was Dale and his wife and a few other people. I didn't even remember who they are. And I just had an idle conversation. I said to myself, or to them, you know, I said, geez, it's a shame that I hadn't planned a little bit more in advance. I would have called a couple of people that I know from the East Coast, from New York, who had lectured for me. I ran the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences. I said, one of my friends, a fellow I kind of liked because he had a sense of humor, was a fellow by the name of Alan Vaughan. He had lectured and taught classes at the School of Occult Arts and Sciences, which I ran for about 10 years. And he moved to San Francisco to become editor of Psychic magazine, which is at that point, it has been published for 30 years or something, very polished, glossy magazine, and a pretty serious journal on parapsychology. It wasn't like Fate or anything. It wasn't people's ghost stories. He did interviews with like Dr. Ryan from Duke University and so forth. Anyway, so I said, geez, you know, I would have really liked to have called Alan Vaughan and invited him to the lectures. We went around about eating our brunch. 2 minutes later, who walks through the front door of this restaurant where we're having the brunch but Alan Vaughan? And I was shocked because I said, well, this must, I must be imagining it's not him. So I bring the guy over. I said, are you Alan Vaughan? He said, yes. He was walking his dog. And I said, how you been? And I said, well, why is this a place you come to often? He said, no, I've never been here before. I was just walking down the street and I felt the urge to come in. Okay, so we sat and we talked, and I asked him, I said, well, what are you doing these days? What have you been working on outside of editing Psychic magazine? And he says, well, I'm working on a book on synchronicity, and I guess this will be in there. So I think it's case number 17 or something. You can find it on in a used bookstore for $50 or something. It's published probably back in around.
So what do you think synchronicity is?
Well, I don't know, but here's a few more. I'm on the Long John Neville show, and the next day I get a call in my office. We had a real office in those days. Was publishing a UFO Review, which is the world's only official UFO newspaper at the time. I've been doing this for so long. I've had so many different magazines, Anyway, so I get a call from this gal who works for New York magazine, and she does on the last page, inside front back cover, a column called Best Bets, and it's like 10 things, 10 best bets, things like best restaurants, best this. Okay, so she wanted to do 10 best UFO sightings in New York. And I said, well, that's a great idea. And so I'm trying to rack my brain about, there have been sightings, a lot of sightings in Manhattan. I mean, most people don't realize it. But I came up with enough to fill the column, And I said, well, geez, let me mail you some additional literature, because certainly you'd like to include my address or something in there so people get in touch with us. So she gives her address as 11 East 30th Street, and I said, no, that's my address. It turns she lived on the 6th floor, so she just came down in the elevator to get the material. Okay, it goes on. Okay, I have 2 more, and then I'll give an explanation for this. I'm near Joshua Tree, and I had heard about this place, which was a theme motel. They have the Batman room, the circus room, I can't even, the Whips and Chains room, I don't know. I mean, all kinds of different things. I can't even remember what they are. It's near a military base, so they get a lot of military guys to bring their sweethearts and girlfriends over there. But I thought it would be camp, since I didn't, it's a different place, and I like to travel and stay in different places and weird hotels and things like that, So I check in, I go to check in around midnight. And the guy said, well, we don't really have anything left. We have 1 room left. It's the Bermuda Triangle room. Oh, okay, so I had to, now, there wasn't really
Now
anything.
there's a Tim Beckley
Okay,
room
there wasn't,
somewhere.
yeah, there wasn't anything really strange about the Bermuda Triangle room, except this particular incident. All it had was a little like lighthouse and a windmill and a sea captain on a painting on the wall. I mean, it had to be the most unthrilling room in this theme hotel. Okay, this one I like in particular. I was giving a conference. I promoted a conference out in Palm Springs, near the home of the original contactees, George Adamski, George Van Tassel, and I invited the guy, whoever was still living at the time, George Van Tassel's grandson, his uncle Daniel Boone, who, as far as I know, is the only contactee who ever went aboard a spaceship naked. He said in those days they just had an outhouse. They didn't have any plumbing in the house. This is the desert. They probably still don't in a lot of places like that. I've met people who live in the desert just because they want to be 40 miles away from everybody. They go into town to buy jugs of water. Anyway, so he said he had to go out to use the facilities, and he walks out there, and here comes this saucer lands, and they invited him on board ship. And he said, "Well, I'm not dressed." And they said, "Well, it don't matter, And this is the same plot of land where George Van Tassel, who built the Integratron out there, said he had his contacts and channeled Ash Star and so forth. Anyway, so we have this really spiffy hotel in the middle of Palm Springs. They gave us all the facilities for free because it was July. If you think it's hot in Tucson in June, boy, is it hot. But what a beautiful place. And I advertised, I didn't get a lot of people show up, but my keynote speaker was Robert Weiss, who was the producer, director of The Day the Earth Stood Still, right? I figure this, if you're going to get a keynote speaker for a contactee convention, this is the guy to get. And he happily came down, and people asked him questions about the hotel, about the movie and so forth. Okay, so we're down in the lobby, downstairs, setting up all the vendors' tables and everything. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the keynote speaker is around 7. Some people are wandering in, and the vendors are bringing their stuff out of their cars and sitting up. A couple people stopped at a table, and one gentleman stopped, and he left a stack of mail and wandered down the hall. I guess he was looking through the books and forgot that he had left there. So I pick up the mail, and I follow him down the hall, and I look at the envelope, and I see the mail is addressed to Kenneth Anger. Now, I don't know if any of you here are B-movie buffs, but Kenneth Anger is kind of a controversial figure in making low-budget movies. In fact, he did a film, I think you could probably buy it on the internet, called Lucifer Rising, which the soundtrack he had done by Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, who lived in the house that Aleister Crowley. It all ties in with Loch Ness again, because it was right across the loch in Scotland. Okay, so I knew who this guy was, and he's kind of like an underground cult figure. So, geez, I said to myself, boy, what a coincidence, to meet this guy. Obviously he's interested in UFOs. I mean, well, in fact, the poster that they did for his movie showed the Sphinx dressed as a woman or something like that. He's a cross-dresser, I think. He's still alive. He's a fabulous artist, and he's done some new movies and things like that. You could Google him on the internet. Anyway, so I go up to him and I said, Kenneth, are you the Kenneth Anger, the movie? Here's your mail. Are you the Kenneth Anger, the movie maker? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, are you coming to our conference this weekend? And he said, well, I would like to, but I really don't have the funds to do that. And I said, well, you're kind of like my underground movie hero. Would you please come as my guest? So I had Kenneth Anger and Robert Weiss at the same table and got to introduce both of them. But I mean, what's the chances of me? And he had a UFO sighting. He lived in not Al Jackson. Who sang Mammy?
Al Jolson.
Al Jolson. He lived in Al Jolson's house, right? And he had been out one morning. I guess his exercise was like riding a bike. So he had the silent object that kind of followed him while he was out riding his bike in Palm Springs. So he was obviously influenced by UFOs to have this on the cover of his movie and all. And he's quite a character. Okay, so what does this all mean? You'd say, geez, why can't I win the lottery? I mean, I've had this happen to me so many times, and so have a lot of other people involved UFO. What is the meaning of this, these synchronicities? Well, I think, again, it's kind of some proof that there is an outside intelligence or force. They can't show themselves in any rational way to us, but they can do things that influence. Sometimes maybe make an object
prod
look.
us along, or give us ideas,
Or, well, that would be going maybe a little bit further than it seems to have, because none of these things that I really get any ideas that I could say that I cashed in on, but yet you can't say that any of these are really a coincidence. I mean, it's far beyond a coincidence. Now, okay, this is one theory. There's a fellow by the name of John C. Lilly. He wrote a book called Eye of the Tiger, Eye of the Dolphin, Eye of the Cyclone, whatever, yeah, Eye of the Cyclone. He claimed that he talked to dolphins, okay? How did he do this? Well, he had ketamine, which is special K, if anybody would, stay away from it. But anyway, there are a lot of people, of course, who say that, you know, while you're having a altered state of consciousness experience, whether it's drug-induced or through hypnosis or what, you can bring in or see these other realms. I don't know whether I'm open to that or not. But anyway, he had a theory that he had contacted this higher power of an extraterrestrial origin. Lilly, he actually even identified it. He referred to this network of subliminal entities as ECCO, an acronym for Earth Coincidence Control Office. Lilly was positive that all of these coincidences in his life, and he had a whole bunch of them too, had been arranged by higher forces, and that whatever unfortunate folly fell into his path along the road to knowledge, this ECCO group would be there to guide him safely through the tunnel to the light. And he goes on to describe all these other experiences and things. But you know, there are other people out there who have these experiences, but they don't identify it as UFOs. See, we're here all interested in UFOs because we've seen some other being, perhaps, or we've seen a light in the sky. But I think the same thing that happens in the seance room and in a haunted house is probably the same thing.
How about Adamski with the Ouija board? Because
Oh,
I didn't know about that
all right,
one.
Okay.
But
Georgia,
that ties
yes,
in.
okay. Georgia, we published recently a book called Pioneers of Space. Now, this is something that Adamski's cohorts in the George Adamski Foundation do not talk about, because they want to put this all in the realm of nuts and bolts. That Adamski went physically on board a spacecraft. He met Orthon, a being from, you know, another planet, and it's all reality. However, if you start delving into the background of George Adamski, like we did. Now, this book, Pioneers of Space, it's an original manuscript that he wrote in 1946, about 5 years before his experiences in the desert with Orthon. He describes a being, Christ-like being, in this book. Okay, so some people said, well, he based his later experiences on this book that he had written as science fiction. I don't know one way or another whether that's true or not. I've read parts of the book. I haven't even read it all, to be honest with you, because it's not very good writing. If it's a science fiction book, it's one of the worst that's ever written. But it's interesting to note that he wrote this book 5 years before he went on a UFO crusade. Back in the 1930s, and we have the clippings from the Los Angeles Times, he was involved in an organization that he had started called the Royal Order of Tibet, which is a mystical order. In fact, he claims as a child, and we know this to be bogus, he spent his youth in Tibet. Well, Adamski didn't spend his youth in Tibet. I can almost guarantee you that. But he was always involved in metaphysics. The people that he hung out with were the earlier channels. In those days, before the channels, they were psychics and they were mediums. In fact, one of his associates who was there, supposedly at this first encounter, was a fellow by the name of George Hunt Williamson. You can still read his book. In fact, we have a reprinted edition of Other Tongues Over Flesh. He's a very, very interesting character. But he also was a member of a neo-Nazi group. In fact, the head of this group that he had belonged to, by the name of Beckley, had spent some time in jail for being a Nazi sympathizer. So again, you have this kind of very strange Nazi connection. But beyond that, Williamson was also a channeler. He picked up messages on his ham radio, and he used the Ouija board. The first contact that Adamski had with Orthon, they were told to go to this particular locale by
That
using the
reminds
Ouija
me of
board.
those military guys who went AWOL.
Oh, I know that. Well, of course, yeah, Vance Davis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting,
Yeah.
because they have other
So-
cases
so no matter-
that
so
are
no matter how-
similar,
so
but
no
you
matter
don't
how
hear
you-
about that one
Yeah.
in the Indiana.
So no matter how you try to cut this, there is always a paranormal or a psychic experience.
Have you concluded that there's a spiritual, or that spirits and UFOs are not they're not too far apart as far as
Well,
that there's a spiritual or?
okay, well now, if you go back to the time, I guess most of us have heard of Harry Houdini, the great escape artist. Again, in history, what comes around goes around. In fact, I shared an office with the amazing Randy, who was probably the biggest arch debunker of the paranormal today. And also, in fact, I was on, Randy had a radio show on every night, kind of like the Long John show. In fact, when Long John had moved from WLR to NBC, Randy took that all-night spot, and he had guests on. He was trying to imitate the Long John show, and he had guests on, myself, Alan Greenfield, and a lot of other people. If you went on his show, though, you weren't allowed to go on Long John, so that was a standing policy for a long time. But he wasn't that bitter in those days, obviously, against the people involved in the occult and UFOs. Otherwise, he would never have gotten any guests. It only came later on that he became such an arch debunker, because I think, like Harry Houdini, he realized that in order to get a lot of attention in the media, that's probably the only way you could do it, is to debunk spiritualists or UFO people or people who claim that they can bend silverware in spoons. But I was fairly good friends. In fact, I'm still in touch with him, Uri Geller. Of course, this Israeli psychic and spoon bender. He lives in England now. He's kind of semi-retired. I don't think he does too many. We did have a TV show for a while in Europe. But I remember one time, two experiences with him that led me, and he believed that his powers were coming from UFOs. This is most people don't realize that, but Dr. Andrei Puharish, who was the first the scientist to bring it into this country, wrote a book. It's called Yuri. You can still find it. He kind of never really supported it that much.
UFOs or
well, it talks about Yuri's UFO experiences. That he actually had UFO experiences where he would go into trance, and this group called the Nine would speak through him, and then he started doing all these weird spoon bending and keys disappearing and all kinds of things. Okay, so I was over. We were over a friend's house. We had a mutual friend by the name of Herbert Bailey. He was the science editor of Argosy magazine. Now, why Argosy needed a science editor, I don't know, because it was a men's adventure magazine in those days, and a big circulation, probably close to 1 million or so. And I was over Herb's house, and Yuri was there. And Herb wanted to see, I guess, in his role as science editor, he wanted some proof, right? So Yuri said, well, give me your key, give me any key that you have, So Herb gives him his, just house key or something to that effect. And then he tells me, he says, take a key out of your pocket and put it across the room on a desk or a radiator or whatever it was. Okay. So you probably seen him do this on TV. He sits there and he's dropping the key in. He's trying to really get into it, to get the energy up, and also probably just a little bit of showmanship. Okay, so Herb's key starts to bend and bend and bend and bend. I would say that it bent probably a good 33%. He didn't palm it. He didn't switch keys. He didn't have a vise with him. He didn't have some kind of something that's going to soften the metal. Well, that's insanity, Okay, so after he's all finished, we gawk and we all see what he's done. He tells me to go look at my key across the room. Well, my key did not bend as much as Herb Bailey's key did, but it had bent maybe 10 or 12%. He didn't touch it. He never touched. Now you could say, well, he did something to Herb's key, but he never touched my key. It was across the room. Okay, so we got pretty friendly with Yuri. And he was always looking to meet celebrities and be photographed with them and so forth, because he put attention to what he was doing. He had a little bit of an egomaniac. I don't think he would be the first to deny that. We took him up to see Muhammad Ali. Now, I was working for the Inquirer at the time, so I met a lot of these celebrities, and a lot of them had UFO experiences, just like everyone else. Well, Ali was the king of UFO celebrities. He claimed not only one sighting, he had 20 of them. The first one actually had gotten a little attention in the press. He was training for his fight with George Foreman, and he was out with Angelo Dundee jogging through Central Park one morning, like at 5:30 a.m. or something, and the newspaper had the story about how he and his trainer had seen these two lights near an apartment building. It was like, I said, "Wow, that's a great story for the Inquirer." Right? So we found out where he was staying because we subscribed to a celebrity service. And most people don't realize this. There are a lot of celebrities who are looking to be interviewed. It's not like they're hiding from the well, there were no paparazzi in those days. I was the closest to I was the UFO paparazzi.
Hey, that's a different one.
Okay, but so anyway, so we met Ali, and he told us all about his UFO experiences. And he was a member of the Nation of Islam, and that's part of their belief system about the wheel in the sky and how the UFOs are coming to assist the black man or something like that. In fact, they had a UFO conference, I think in Mexico, the Farrakhan had a UFO conference in Mexico recently, invited a lot of American UFO researchers to come and chat with him on it. Didn't give very much attention to the press here, because I guess the American press doesn't like Farrakhan too much. But anyway, so Ali told us all these things, and when we mentioned we were friends with Geller, he said, "Oh, bring Geller up, I'd like to meet him," and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we drove up to the training camp in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. And now Ali tried to get the attention right away. It turns out that Ali is an amateur magician. Obviously, who has been influenced by the amazing Randy. Okay, so he brings out, to do his rope-a-dope trick, he brings out, the rope. You probably see the magicians, so they cut the rope and they put it back together again. And Yuri got a little bit upset at this because he thought, he would have an audience with the champ, and Ali was trying to do his one-upmanship. Okay, so finally, now, Ali would set up on this, he had a big rock, and he would stand up on the rock and ring the bell, and everybody who was at the camp was expected to come over and listen to him rave and rant, whatever the subject of the day was. Very entertaining, Okay, so anyway, we kind of drifted away from that group, and Ali at the time was married to Belinda. I think that was his second wife. He'd been married maybe 3 times now. And she was more enthusiastic. She wanted to actually see some sort of phenomena. So she said, "Well, Yuri, what can you do?" So she had a ring on her finger, and I hope for her sake it wasn't very expensive. Anyway, he put his hand over her ring and started with the concentration and the whole bit. And he said, "Let me know if you feel like you feel something. Is there anything happening?" And after about 20 or 30 seconds, she says, "Yes, yes, yes. I feel my hand is getting warm. I feel my hand getting warm." Okay, so he did some more, sighing and grieving over it and doing the whole thing, So finally, he removes his hand, and the stone in the setting of the ring had disappeared. It wasn't there anymore. Okay. Now, people ask me, did she ever get the setting to so it wasn't a diamond ring. I don't think he got wealthy that way. She never. I don't remember her ever making any comment about it. So she was just happy to have it disappear and have proof that the stone was missing, that he was able to do something. All right. I don't possibly see how that could have been faked. I mean, how do you dig out a ring from a setting? Okay. One last thing. There was the fellow he was training with, and I mentioned this on Coast to Coast recently, and George knew who he was. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a famous sparring partner. And he wanted to see something. Okay, he had a religious medal on, like St. Christopher or something. But it wasn't a cheap dime store one. It was pretty thick metal. So as far as I remember, Yuri didn't even take it off his neck or anything. He just took it and started pressing on it. And after he did that for a half a minute or so, he took his hand away, and there was an indentation in the metal. So again, here's UFO powers that are showing themselves in a paranormal sense.
At least that's what he believes.
Well, I'm not sure he tried to play that down. That's something that he never really pushed. I mean, I have interviews and stuff about where he talks about his UFO experiences, but it was Dr. Andrei Puharish who had more of a background in channeling, and in fact, Puharish was supposedly worked for the CIA and was a good friend of Timothy Leary in the early experimentations with LSD and all this stuff. But anyway, he was the one that had all this information, that he had hypnotized Geller and all this material.
Well, through the years, there have been a lot of skeptics trying to disprove um, paranormal things, and a lot of times they are magicians.
Did you say you met Lord Clancarty?
Yeah, I spoke at the House of Lords, yeah.
Lord Clancarty claims that he spoke with an American test pilot.
Yeah, who spoke with, who knew about the Eisenhower.
Who was
Yeah.
president when Eisenhower, remember the
Yes.
ETs?
Yeah, I remember reading that in
And
the
he said
Inquirer,
that
yeah.
the ETs disappeared in
Yeah.
front of Eisenhower.
Yes.
Did you ever?
I don't
did you
remember
ever
us, I don't remember us talking about that, I have to be honest with
Did you ever hear who the test pilot
No.
was?
you. No, I had no idea. But I did,
It's recently come out that, and I assume it was Chuck Yeager, because Chuck Yeager was testing the planes at Edwards Air Force
Yeah.
Base.
I
at that
have
time.
no way of
Then
knowing.
recently it's come out that it was Howard Hughes. He was
Well,
also a test pilot.
well, how, I don't think the Earl of Clancarty ever met Howard Hughes. I don't think Brinsley was ever in this country for that matter, so I don't know. Now, he was good friends, who I also met with Lord Hill Norton. Of course, Lord Hill Norton was the head of the British fleet. Actually, it's interesting. I think I have a quote here on the back of the book, or inside the book, from Lord Hill Norton. Okay, he said, the late five-star admiral and the former head of the British Ministry of Defense believed strongly in the existence of UFOs, but he did not see them in a positive light, professing instead in his privately printed UFO Concern report, and this is a quote, UFOs are essentially a religious matter rather than a military threat, and furthermore, there is certainly a degree of psychic involvement in almost every case. Quite often, however, such experiences are defined to Orthodox Christian beliefs. Anyway, this is what he believed, and I didn't know that either at the time that I spoke with him. He was involved in some free energy Nikola Tesla work, and I only spoke with him for a few minutes. Well, now, the talk at the House of the Lords, it was a private group. It was not officially sanctioned by the House of Lords, but just like the UN and probably Congress and all, they meet privately. And Lord Hill Norton, I'm sorry, Clancarty, Earl of Clancarty, Brinsley, who's written books on the inner earth and stuff like that, in fact, Atlantis. He organized this group, and there were some members of the group who were diehard believers, and other members who were just interested in the subject but thought it was all a bunch of hogwash. So, but it was interesting, and I spent a day with them. In fact, I went to Parliament, followed in all, they do the whole procession and coming in.
Did you ever meet Desmond Leslie?
No. No, I was only in England. I've been in England once, and I spent like 10 days there or something. So I think probably at that point Leslie had probably. I was thinking, do you know what year he passed away? Yeah, because I think Leslie was popular, of course, around the time that the Adamski book was published. Then I think he kind of filtered out of the subject for a little while, and then kind of got back into it. But never as strongly. Well, that was the first, I guess, Ancient Astronaut book, you know. And in fact, now we're reprinting some of the books by W. Raymond Drake, who was actually even before Van Daniken on this, you know. So whatever this intelligence is, it's been interacting with us since the beginning of time. There's no doubt about it. And you know, I can't say that none of it is extraterrestrial, but when you think of the vast distances between here and there. Okay, they could send some ships every once in a while, but why would they appear over Phoenix one night, disappear into nothingness, change their shape, and appear over China 2 months later? I mean, it's just what's the reasoning behind it? Because even if they make these contacts with just like individuals, they must realize pretty quickly that people like Adamski and George Van Tassel, there's a giggle factor associated with that, and nobody takes them seriously. I mean, they really don't. I mean, outside of the people in this room, perhaps at least to give it some, thought, the general public hears these stories, and they are far-fetched. There's no doubt about it. Even in the 1950s and 60s, to say that you met a man from Venus or met a woman from Mars is unbelievable, because we know for a fact that there probably is not any. Even if there's some structures on the moon and on Mars, there aren't people walking around on the street there. I mean, it's just not happening, So it doesn't. Frank Strange just covered it up later on. He said, well, the person was from inside Venus, but that's okay. But, I mean, it's not to say that these people didn't have some sort of experience, but I think a lot of it was psychic in nature, or that this intelligence tries to pull the wool over people's eyes, either on purpose or maybe unconsciously.
That was the whole thrust of Jacques Vallée's book, Messengers of Deception.
It is, yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, you go back and you read all the literature of parapsychology. I mean, this has been going on. It's been going on for thousands of years. It's not something new. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to mention about that. In lots of the native cultures, they all have, stuff about shapeshifters, and
Right.
but they also all pretty much tell you that, well, sometimes it's this being or whatever shapeshifter. A lot of times they're the trickster. In other words,
Yes.
if they're
Oh, yeah, my friend Chris
playing
O'Brien.
some game on you, or
My friend Chris O'Brien, who's the co-host of the Paracast, he's written a book on it.
5 minutes.
In fact, he's interviewed in here. You got to get this book. Don't buy the $29.95 edition. Buy it on Kindle. It's $10. Let's have
Why
one
don't you
more.
tell them about what's happening to books and
Oh.
why Kindle, and I think people need to kind of know that books are becoming
Well, I think.
extinct.
I think probably if you took a tour through this area, you'd probably realize that. Because even in New York, Barnes. I remember I saw Whitley Strieber.
Since he's been in publication since he's 14,
Well,
he kind of knows.
Yeah,
what
I
it is.
had a mailing list of 4,000. At the peak of the mom and pop metaphysical bookstores, there were like 4,000 bookstores on my mailing list. Now it's down to about 350 or something like that.
Borders
They've all,
are closing down.
yeah, Borders closed, Barnes and Noble. Well, they've all got now. Okay, even before the electronic books, though, publishing books is not an economically viable way of being in business. To be honest with you, I mean, I can tell you, we had our years when we were doing pretty good. A small publisher, we print 2,000-3,000 copies of a new book, and ship 7 or 8 cartons to wholesalers. There were all these little wholesalers that were dealing with these mom and pop metaphysical stores. They were all over the place. At Tucson must have had a dozen of them. Phoenix was loaded with them. I
The
mean,
good old days.
Good old, yeah. But little by little, people they heard Shirley MacLaine, or they read the book and weren't interested in anything else, or they start to get it on the TV, of course, with the History Channel and the Discover and all this other stuff. And then, of course, the Amazon. That was the first hint that the publishing was going down the tubes, because everybody could become a writer. I mean, it really just kind of leveled the publishing field. I mean, before, if you wanted to be a writer, chances are, if you published it yourself, you'd never get any promotion on it, because people would just say he published it himself as a vanity book. If you went to a real publisher, even if they liked the book, it'd probably be a year and a half before they printed it. That's kind of why I got into the publishing. I wasn't going to wait to tell anybody to tell me what my title was going to be, what was going to be on the cover, and I had to wait a year and a half to get it published. That's kind of how I got into it. But little by little, Amazon became the main force in the business, and everybody could become, for $600, you could become a publisher. See, and so instead of having 10 books to select from, on the subject every
So
few
you're
months.
converting a lot of your books to
Yeah.
Kindle,
Yeah,
and what else?
Nook is the other one. That would be Barnes and Noble.
So
But
if people wanted to get your books